Okay, so 13 Reasons Why, season 2, minus the adjunct episode talk about thingy. Yeah, I don't do talk stuff. Um, School, in this respect, seriously, hasn't changed since I went to school. Albeit I didn't actually really go to, I mean, I did like a freshman year, I think, in two schools. But yeah, there was some things that went down in junior high and high school and the parties outside of school. And I was, believe it or not, somewhat of an outcast. Um, in school. But for some reason, while everyone else was still in school or just coming out of high school and stuff in the little rural towns I was in, uh, I was somewhat accepted by uh, some of the people I actually almost, you know, well, there was some altercations in school. Anyways, things happen. Um, Many of these things, possibly excluding the guns, there were a lot of guns. This is the amazing thing. There were guns and kids, I mean 10, 12, 14, going hunting and knowing how to use guns and knowing what death is. And, I lived with a mentally disturbed, Satan worshiping, animal sacrificing delinquent. So I saw that side of it as well. And yes, it's accurate, but it hasn't really changed except for, of course, population density. And once again, when we're dealing with per capita effect, we're dealing with the more population, the denser the population, the more likely things that are going to happen. In my lifetime, the population has increased by 50% in America alone. Um, that, you know, is significant, as well as 50-50 male female employment has been pretty much constant for that period of time. It was building up until that point, but since then, multiple generations have been raised on this equality, not like, my parents, or, I mean, I was raised with two or one and a half working parents. But yeah, obviously we know that rape has always been a constant in life. Not a good point. It's just a fact. These are facts. Um, as well as feelings of angst. I mean, obviously, punk music didn't come from nothing decades and decades ago. So, yes, this has all been there. How is it portrayed in the show, which is the relevant thing? Somewhat adequately, but there's still a lot of as much as they're talking about the things that need to be talked about, the characters themselves aren't really communicating very well. And no one is teaching the communication part of communicating. They tell you to communicate, but they don't really teach the communication. There's, I mean, yeah, can a parent be that blindsided? Because that's a theme of the series. It's not a, plot point. It's a theme. Are parents, how much the hours that you have each day with your children compared to where they are in school, and the fact that everyone that's a teacher was once a student. And generally, most teachers were on the wrong side of popularity in school. Um, just saying, I'm not judging. I'm just saying it's a fact. It's also a theme within most television shows and movies on the subject as well. You got, there's, the bullies that just really became gym and shop teachers, and the other teachers that were like bookworms, and, they weren't, there are very few cool kids that become teachers. So that's another aspect. But they know, because the problems existed 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, 100 years ago. I mean, well, okay, we'll ease off on the 100, because schools in America, as we know them, only really started to exist around the World War II Korea period. Um, Education has changed a lot in the past century, and you can't really judge on 19th century one room schoolrooms in Iowa and stuff, where basically all the grades were in one room, somehow taught at the same time by one teacher. It's a little different, especially when you have dead zones for students. There are bathrooms, and day by day, what teachers can do. Okay, we know you can't put a camera in a bathroom because it's a bathroom, except, that there are stalls in there, and you should, have some level of knowing what's going on in there without taking away their privacy. Teachers can't go into the bathroom, which means, because, when I was a kid, we did actually have teachers that would occasionally pop their head into a bathroom. You know, we just basically thought keeping the window open would let all the smoke out and stuff like that. But yeah, bad things happen in bathrooms. Bad things happen in locker rooms. And it's, I mean, I'm not telling you nothing you don't know. You know what these things are. You know where the problems are. And you know that there are all these other factors that allow these problems to exist and perpetuate. And no one ever, it's like, okay, but we can't put a teacher in a bathroom because then there's a possibility of misconduct. But we can have the kids shower with other kids of the same gender, which is getting even more and more complicated. Not technically, because the same percentage of the population is not heterosexual as it was then. It's basically just then they were more either invisible for their own choices and actions or not. But the basis is not just the bullying, but the effects of a rape. But what it's also showing is that the same instance happening to multiple people happens differently and is going to have a different reason. How they deal with it, what tools they personally have, and that there's a secondary factor here that I still don't think has been uncovered about why it happened. I mean, there's a lot of new information in season 2 that we didn't have in season 1. We had a perspective. on season 1. We have a different perspective in season 2. And there's still a lot of gaps because, especially the way it was presented, in some cases, I'm still confused as to which was, which. And when you watch it, you'll find out that there are like multiple versions of each story being presented and none really being presented, except a couple being presented as final fact. Or maybe I've just missed something being tired when I was watching over the past few days. And this is going way too long. So there is a season 3 coming. There's a lot of mixed emotions over this, and yes, it's going to affect up to 5% of the population. And this is a very, very 5%. It's not determined by race, not sexual identity, not religion. It's just 5% that are going to be able to not deal with watching this. And they know it exists, and they know what it's going to be. And that is the key. If they choose to watch it knowing what it is, then they're going to watch it. It's here. It's on the computer. You can watch it on Netflix. It's not technically, it could be restricted, but it would take a lot of other things away. Depends on a lot of factors. Or whose computer you're watching it on, whose account you're watching it on, all these factors. So if someone in a vulnerable position watches this, that would be triggered by it in any of the different respects. It could make a bully angry. It could make a victim suicidal. It could, that percentage, not, and I seriously, I would count it as much less than 5%. But here's the thing. If you're on a path to suicide, anything can be perceived as a trigger. Anything. There are suicidal people that there's no love, there's no friendship, there's no job that's going to save you. You might be able to postpone it somehow. You might live with it for decades. But if you really want, if there's these things that no matter how much you explain, it's the communication thing. No matter, you need to have a consistency. And what you see it exhibited here is a lot of the isolation. Oh, they need to go away from all of their friends that are trying to support them because it's not support, it's enabling. So we're going to isolate them and make them validate their fear of being alone and that there's not going to be anyone there for them. We're going to keep closing their little world down and then wonder why they commit suicide. That's one side of it. And you see a lot of different factors in this. You'll see it, how it's presented in the show. It's not a plot point. It's an action, a tool. But it's the wrong tool. And, anyways, watch it if you can handle it, if you can deal with these subjects. And just because you've been a victim doesn't mean you can't handle it. Like I said, 5%. 5% of any group. 5% of every group. 5% of multiple cross groups can't handle it. And they know who they are. Unfortunately, sometimes they'll watch it anyways. Okay, I'm sorry, I rambled on for nearly 15 minutes here. But it brings up a lot of points. And they definitely need to be communicated. You need to find a few people, not a specific, but a few people to communicate with, even if it's parts.